Hello, everybody. So, origin stories are a thing. I realized I never gave an origin story for my own mental health and why I became interested in destigmatization of mental health, mental illness, advocating, educating, and helping others to improve and stabilize their mood and coping mechanisms. What is my impetus for doing this channel? How did I find my way to a diagnosis? The current diagnosis. It's often a long, winding road to a mental health diagnosis. And your diagnoses change over time as the picture of your illness changes over time. Don't be surprised when your illness label changes. It doesn't mean that they don't know what they're doing. Just as a medical illness exhibits symptoms that progress over time, and as the picture becomes clearer, as more and more symptoms of the illness represent themselves over the long term, the true nature of your illness becomes more and more clear. That's why it is helpful to have one continuous care team observing you over a long period of time. This is often not the case when it comes to mental illness because people are often not aware that they even have a problem until they reach crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. And due to insurance and other issues, your history may be scattered all over the place, and there is no clear continuity to the picture of the totality of your illness, the same as you would with a medical illness. Gather all of your documentation, any previous hospitalizations, any previous doctors you have seen, all your previous medications. Gather all those records when you are in a stable and healthy place to be doing so. And if you don't seem to be in one of those places and you are in need of a second assessment of your illness or a reconsideration of your illness, get a medical advocate or a loved one to do this for you and with you, so that the person you go to see doesn't have to start over and over and over and over and over and over and over again with just this tiny picture of how you are and what symptom you are exhibiting at any given moment. Imagine trying to diagnose MS with only one symptom. Here, there, else. Heat intolerance. It could be a billion things. They need to see you over time and the totality of your symptoms. So make sure you either have one continuous care team, or that you take it upon yourself to collect all your records, so that when you move on to get a formal final diagnosis, so that you have proper treatment, which is the purpose of getting a formal, proper diagnosis. The point of getting a diagnosis is not so that you have a label to live by. You are not your mental illness. But the more accurate the diagnosis, the quicker you can get effective treatment for you and your particular situation. So my household was chaotic. I had a large family. We were of low socioeconomic standing, and I was the youngest of many children. My parents had issues of their own, and everyone was pretty distracted. So I was left to my own devices a lot, amongst many brothers And hanging out with your little sister is not the cool thing to do. And so I spent a lot of my time by myself when I was growing up in a very chaotic household. I was abused. I won't get into more of that. That's my own personal story. It has come up. Uh, got the lucky stick and became a woman. Not to say that that doesn't happen to men, but it's far more common to happen to women. So I had early life trauma, and initially I was diagnosed with bulimia and PTSD and depression. This was just prior to graduating from high school. It was the first time I ever saw a therapist. It was an emergency scenario because I reported suicidality. And at the time, it was legal for you to see a therapist 3 times without your parents knowing. They would ship you from the school to therapy and back. But because I had expressed suicidality, they wanted to inform my parents regardless, which they did. And that was a whole other cascade of issues to deal with. But that was my first trek into therapy of any sort, or a mental health diagnoses of any sort, was my senior year of high school. Up till then, I was an honor roll all year, every year student. I had some extracurricular activities. I had very few friends. I was very isolated at home and at school. My home life was very chaotic, and I had an abuse history. I coped with these things through my eating disorder. And initially, given my presentation, I was diagnosed with depression and bulimia and PTSD because of my trauma history and what I was re-experiencing because of that trauma history. In that exact same time, I was actually put into a safe house because someone that I had a PPO against threatened to kill me. So there was just a lot going on. The school got put on lockdown, and I won't get into all the details, but there was madness. Everybody's got their own madness to overcome, and that was some of mine. And so my first trek, I was diagnosed with PTSD, bulimia, and depression. As I went off to college, due to observation and medications, my diagnosis was changed to bipolar, not otherwise specified. Not otherwise specified because it was too early into the awareness that I had bipolar to tell where I was going to fall. And this came because of my family history and observing me over a period of time with the same licensed professional, and my reaction to an antidepressant that put me into a manic episode. Now, you can have mania triggered by an antidepressant and not be bipolar. It can just be a side effect of the antidepressant, but it does give an indication that you may be bipolar if you have that reaction to an antidepressant medication. And my genetics as bipolar and schizophrenia are genetic disorders They're not directly heritable, but they have genetic components and they are biologic disorders. My mother is bipolar 2, and her father was schizotypal personality disorder, which is odd, eccentric personality. Mimics schizophrenia. They're still trying to decide whether that is a personality disorder or a mild form of schizophrenia. And my father had addiction problems. He was a wonderful man, but he had addiction problems. And his brother, my uncle, was paranoid schizophrenic and hospitalized my entire life. So schizophrenia, addiction, and bipolar run in my family on both sides. And so I had the genetic gun loaded, and environment pulled the trigger. Just because you have the heritability of the disorder, it raises your likelihood to get the disorder, but that doesn't mean you're actually going to wind up with a mental illness just because you're genetically predisposed at a higher rate than other people. Environment, your personal sensitivities, introduction of drugs and other chemicals, other things have to happen to trigger your first episode of illness. And so my diagnosis morphed into bipolar not otherwise specified. When I was about ready to leave college, my senior year of college, and there's a lot that I'm leaving out here, I had my first psychotic break. And I remember laying awake many nights in a row. My schoolwork was done weeks in advance. My apartment was spotlessly clean. At first, everything was just perfect. Everything was just too perfect. And then thoughts began to race and race and race, and I began to think fantastical things like cures for diseases and how everything in the world is interconnected, and DNA is related to a snowflake and spider webs and the galaxy. And I remember thinking these thoughts at midnight in the winter, in a snowstorm, in my underwear, outside of my dormitory. Not long after that, I had to be hospitalized for the first time for mania with psychosis. And I had to come back during the summer and complete my college courses. I had incompletes. I didn't fail to graduate because of the circumstances. They put an I, which is incomplete. And then after I'd recovered in the summer, I had to travel back to school and finish my college courses, and in order to have what I needed to graduate officially. This first hospitalization, my label changed to bipolar 1 with psychotic features, because I was clearly manic. And if you reach the level of full-blown mania, rather than just hypomania, but full-blown mania, you are classified as bipolar 1. That's the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Bipolar 2 only reaches hypomania. Bipolar 1 reaches full-blown mania. If you reach full-blown mania even one time in your life, you are classed as bipolar 1. And at the time I was psychotic. I thought the world was kind of like the Matrix. I thought I could bend space-time and shift things with my mind, like Neo bending the spoon, among other things. And so I had with psychotic features. And you can have psychotic experiences with just plain bipolar, And even with just plain depression, if you, it's like the fever of the illness, the peak, the most extreme version. If you get too manic, you can experience psychosis. If you get too depressed, you can experience psychosis, and have that not be a part of your condition as a whole. So now that's my disorder, and I'm now hospitalized. I come back, I finish college. I didn't have any place to go. Long story, I wound up where I live now. I'm just going to skip all over all of that. But I wound up where I live now. I had never really been in the town before. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know where anything was. I was still kind of sick, mental illness wise. I was having psychotic experiences, like thinking the TV was talking to me, etc. And so I was terrified to leave the house without the person I was living with, leaving with me and taking me everywhere. So I then became housebound and developed agoraphobia. I slowly recovered from my psychosis. My mental health stabilized, but in the time that it took for me to recover in this new place that I had never been before, and always being terribly shy, I developed agoraphobia. And for the next 6 years, I fought just to be able to get back outside the house again and feel secure in doing so. I still struggle with traveling anxieties and leaving outside my comfort zone, places that I can't walk to and walk back from safely, going to new places. I still struggle and work with that issue, though I've come a long way. But being homebound for a very long time, under delusional state of mind, in a completely foreign place, triggered the agoraphobia. And eventually I went to a work rehab place and worked my way up to sustained being outside of the house for a period of time that would be sufficient to working a part-time job and transporting myself back and forth there via the bus. And through this work rehab program, I was placed at my current job, and I built up my hours slowly of travel and safe zones, and eventually I was in a really good place, caring for myself quite well, getting out and around quite well, self-sufficient and close to back to normal. The new normal. Every time you have a psychotic break, you do a little bit of damage, and you're never quite the same. But I was doing pretty well, and I came home and found my partner unexpectedly dead. At this point, he had been my partner for a little over 6 years. We had been living together, and that threw me for a loop. I was now homeless. I had just got my new job. I wasn't even hired in yet. I had to find a place to live. I had to go through grieving. It was traumatic. And about a year later, I met my current partner. And I was doing pretty well at that period. Also, I had re-stabilized my housing. I hadn't been in mental health treatment for a number of years, or on medication for a number of years. And I was, again, working full-time, entirely self-sufficient at this point because I had lost my partner, and working overtime and full-time and getting around and being able to support and sustain myself sufficiently. And about 4 years ago now, something started to go wrong, and every time I would try to do my job, that I've been doing for years. I couldn't do it. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew something was off, because I've done the job. It's not rocket science. I've done it for so long. I could do it with my eyes closed, and I couldn't. I kept making mistakes all of a sudden, here and there, all over the place, and my boss thought that I was just suddenly becoming a bad employee, so we were getting in fights all the time. My life was falling apart. When you start to become psychotic, you don't have insight that anything is wrong. It's like the story of putting the frog in boiling water. If you crank up the heat real slow, the frog does not realize that it is slowly being burnt to death. The water's cranked up so slowly in your illness that you don't realize that there's anything wrong with you or your thinking, but your life around you starts to fall apart. There's problems, there's signals in your life around you is no longer working, and you can't understand why or what you're doing wrong, because you think you're doing and being everything you've always been, and it's just not working anymore. And by the time the water gets cranked up high enough that you have completely lost your mind, part of the psychotic illness is that you also lose your insight. That's part of the illness. You lose your capacity to be able to tell that you are sick. And my behavior became so aberrant that everyone around me knew that I was ill. My neighbors, my landlord, my boss, my boyfriend, everyone could tell that there was something terribly, terribly wrong. I almost lost my apartment. I almost lost my job. I almost lost everything. I was doing dangerous things like sleeping in parks, and climbing on cars, and it was just dangerous, and it lasted for longer than 6 months. I was hospitalized in multiple places, and this was separate and distinct from having a mood episode. There was no depression. There was no mania. There was nothing that led up to this. This just happened all by itself. And so at this point, it took months. When you have psychotic illness, you have a prodrome, which is the point approaching psychosis. Then you have the peak of psychosis, and it lasts for a diagnosis of schizophrenia at least 6 months or longer, unless treated. And then you have the come down, and the come down is typically as long as it took you to prodrome. It will take you that long to come back down and become your normal self again, for the brain to heal from what it's been through, and for you to recover from what you have been through, and to restabilize your life. So my life was restabilized. My diagnosis is essentially, it's still on paper bipolar 1 with psychosis, but it is essentially schizoaffective, because this episode happened completely removed from an episode of mood disorder, of my affective disorder. It didn't happen with depression, it didn't happen with mania. It was completely distinct, and it fit the criteria for schizophrenia. Schizoaffective disorder is when you have a disorder that clinically can be diagnosable along the schizophrenia spectrum, and also have a disorder that can be clinically diagnosable among the affective spectrum, which is depression or bipolar of any kind. For me, it's schizoaffective bipolar type. I am on paper bipolar 1 with psychosis, because unfortunately, schizophrenia and schizophrenia spectrum disorders and psychosis in general is still largely misunderstood in the general public, and stigmatized and misunderstood. And to prevent prejudice, labeling, boxing me in, boxing me out of opportunity, etc., I was placed in the category of bipolar 1 with psychosis on paper for my own societal benefit, which is just unfortunate because of the discrimination against people with schizophrenia. Because really there is only a hairline differentiation in treatment between schizoaffective and bipolar 1 with psychosis. And in order to make the schizoaffective diagnoses, you must have had 2 separate psychotic episodes that are diagnosable for schizophrenia, length and quality, that are not related at all to your mood episodes, and have clinically diagnosable mood disorder. And so I have met that criteria. But the difference is treatment. Treatment for the two is where the importance of the right diagnosis really comes into play. Because if you are bipolar 1 with psychosis, you will be treated primarily with a mood stabilizer, and antipsychotics will be used if and when necessary should you peak and have psychotic symptoms due to extreme episodes of mania or depression. And that's how that works. And a person with bipolar has normal mood states in between depressive episodes, mania, hypomania, mixed episodes. They're not up and down all the time. They're perfectly normal, capable, intelligent people. Schizophrenia is not always completely debilitating either. If you're properly medicated, it's not for everyone in the extreme cases, but many people can be effectively medicated and have effective, productive, happy and fulfilling lives with schizophrenia. So if you are schizoaffective, then you will need and bipolar type, you'll have a mood stabilizer again, but you will also have constant antipsychotic medication. It is not an option. It is not a periodic thing that we do to treat a symptom. Because you are diagnosed as having an ongoing psychotic illness, you have an ongoing psychotic medication regimen. So once a month, I get an antipsychotic injection that lasts a month, and I take a mood stabilizer and a handful of other things to keep myself as even as possible. And I have been with the same treatment team since my last episode, and I have been taking my medicine as prescribed, and not fought and not taken it as I have in the past. So I am on consistent medication and consistent observation, and that's where I am today. It doesn't go away. It's still something that I deal with from the time I open up my eyes in the morning till the time I lay my head down at night. It's something that I will always have to deal with. If you have a mental illness, you're well aware that it's an invisible illness unless you are extremely, extremely, extremely ill. Then your behavior or speech or other things become very apparent to other people. By then you're at the fever of your cold, and you've been sick for a long, long time before it becomes evident to other people. Usually people look well, people act well, people lead productive, happy, healthy, safe, loving, quality, fulfilling lives with mental illness. And yet they still in their own mind, in their own heart, in their self, have to navigate. It's like driving. Your life is a car and you're the driver, and in the passenger seat is your mental illness, and it goes with you everywhere, every day. And you have this cooperative effort that you play to try and keep it occupied and satiated and in control. And that involves a lot of self-acceptance, self-education, self-care, a willingness not to roll over and become a victim or identify yourself as ill or crazy, or that there's something wrong or less than because of having this disorder. It's just like a medical diagnosis. It's something you have to live with every day and treat properly and care for yourself better than other people that might have to, because you have an illness, a chronic illness, like a chronic medical illness. But that doesn't make you morally bankrupt or dangerous or bad in any kind of way. People don't identify as arthritic. I am arthritis. I am diabetes. They don't, but they say, I am mental illness. You are not your mental illness. You are separate from your mental illness. Your mental illness is a condition you have, like a medical condition that you have to learn about, learn to manage, learn to navigate through, around, with, educate those around you. And like all other illnesses, it is just an illness. It has cost me in my life. It has taught me in my life. It has changed my life direction in ways I never saw coming. I have compassion for other people suffering from mental illnesses of a wide variety. I know what they face to a degree to get diagnosed, to get the treatment they need, the stigma that they face, the judgment that they face, the shame that people give themselves to try to hide judgments and stigmas, the stress of trying to navigate your illness every day, the lack of understanding from others, the improper, flawed media representation of it, the cost that it can have on your life, on your relationships, on the limitations that it can set on you, like my college, and my plans for afterward, and the limitations that we set on ourselves, that we believe that it sets on us, because we're misinformed, or we don't have high enough self-esteem, or so we set limitations on ourselves because of the illness. There's so many different ways, reasons that this issue impacts so many people, and there's still so much stigma, so much shame around mental illness diagnoses, so much misunderstanding. It's mystery and mysterious and dangerous, and people don't know about it, they don't understand it, and they don't understand you if you have it. And I just want to help. I've always been the kind of person who has wanted to help. And just like the best addiction counselors are people with former addictions. The best therapists are people who have had their own mental health or family members with mental health problems. The best patient advocates for former patients. We are often driven to the thing that brings our life purpose and our life passion. that which is closest to our hearts. And this has had an impact on my family, on large. This has had an impact on me, in many different arenas of my life. And it has an impact on so many people. All different races, all different religions, all different backgrounds, all different cultures and countries. And that is what drew me here. That is how I wound up in this stage, in this place, in this position in my mental health with schizoaffective / bipolar 1 with psychosis as my current diagnosis. Recovered dish. Recovered from bulimia. Operating a channel that tries to help. I started the channel when I was in a specialized therapy, a group therapy, and part of what they were teaching was giving back, finding a way to contribute, and how much meaning and value and positive feelings that adds to your life. And this was one way in which I thought that I could potentially do that. Reach out. Destigmatize. Show others the coping mechanisms that I try in my own life to get through the days that are difficult. Provide resources, ideas, and options. Allow you to be okay not being okay all the time. Allow you to accept yourself. Allow you to love yourself just as you are. Allow you to recognize that mental illness is very common, very real, very common. And we are not people to be afraid of any more than someone with arthritis. And that's where the channel began, and it kind of just went on from there. So that is my origin story, my mental illness YouTube origin story. Peace. I probably had a lot that I left out, and a lot of useful information that I could have added, but this is very long, so I'm gonna and call it a morning, day, afternoon, evening, afternoon, whenever you watch this. Peace, love, joy. Have a good day. Have a good life. You are not your illness. You have one. It doesn't have you unless you choose to let it have you. Peace, love, and don't stigmatize. Don't point, it's rude, so peace instead.